Hello and welcome to today's episode of Date in a Blink, where we're joined by Daniel Herrold, a dad of 3 and co-founder of Divorced Over 40.
Modern dating sucks, but it doesn't have to. Here on the Date in a Blink podcast, you'll listen in on 10-minute voice-only speed dates between strangers. The experience is designed to move people beyond mindless swiping and marathon messaging. Our position on online dating? It's time to stop collecting pen pals and start, going on actual dates.
Online dating? That actually involves dating? Is that even a thing anymore? But for real, dating should be fun. We hope listening in inspires y'all to try new ways of meeting people. Tune in every other week to hear a new couple go on a date. In between, we'll talk to relationship experts about how the date went and what we can learn from it.
Will our hand-picked podcast matches find love on these Blink dates? Or will they say goodbye to each other after 10 minutes and never look back? Tune in to find out.
Before we jump into today's episode, here's a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Podcash as a collaboration between Racket and Stir. Podcash is free cash for your podcast. Podcash gave away $100,000 to up-and-coming podcasters as a way to support insanely creative and inspiring podcasters. We know how difficult it can be to get a podcast off the ground, and this is why we're so excited to have been Podcash winners ourselves. We would have gone nuts for something like this when we were first starting out. If podcasting has been on your to-do list, or you're already a podcaster, go to podcash.com to stay up to date with future podcast happenings. That's podcash.com. Today on Date in a Blink, we are thrilled to have Daniel Herrold join us to talk a bit about the importance of friendship, rebuilding when a relationship ends, and so much more. Daniel is a dad of 3 and co-founder of Divorced Over 40, a group that seeks to provide a community for midlife divorcees. With a focus on friendship, personal healing, and the readjustments of post-married life, Divorced Over 40 has helped facilitate an inclusive environment for over 10,000 people, online and in person. Along with spearheading Divorced Over 40, Daniel is also the author of a blog and an active voice on social media. So if you're looking for some insightful, funny, and totally relatable content, Daniel's Instagram has got you covered. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm excited to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Divorced Over 40 really seems to emphasize the importance of community. What would you say the role of community is when it comes to personal healing and growth?
Oh, gosh. I mean, community is critical, and there's really a lack of it. And, when I was divorced, and probably 2 years following my divorce, really when I kind of slowed down on dating and was really kind of reflecting on how I've personally progressed after my divorce. I was like, I don't have any friends. And, a lot of times, if you do experience a divorce, or even if you experience the death of a spouse, a lot of your friends really don't know how to deal with you because they're usually in relationships. And so you're kind of left with losing a lot of your friends when you do get divorced. And the idea of fostering new friendships can be intimidating, especially when you're middle-aged. You're like, well, where do I go to meet friends? And so that's where kind of this idea came up is, okay, well, why don't we build a community because everybody's in the same boat. They're all yearning for connection, and we can provide a connection where they can get plugged in, and then everybody's gone through the same life experience that they have. So that there's just this relatability, there's this empathy within the group because we've all either been divorced, we're going through a divorce, we've lost a spouse, we've all experienced a trauma. And so I think it's really, really important.
On that note about how investing in friendships is so important and why you might want to do that, whether it's before or after your, a marriage or loss of spouse, it's sort of a really tricky thing to navigate. We know how important friendships are, but we end up kind of neglecting them when we're in relationships. What advice might you have for building and nurturing friendships while romantically involved with someone?
It is hard. We've all had those friends that once they get a boyfriend or girlfriend, we never hear from them again, right? Yes. They just fall off the face of the earth. And then we're like, well, when they break up, they'll come circling back around, right? And it hurts your feelings, even as a divorced man, I had a female who was a good friend of mine, and she got a boyfriend, and, I'd never hear from her again. So, in hindsight, in my own personal life, I wish that I had invested in more male friends during my marriage, even if they were married themselves and invested more time there. I was just so focused on building my career, raising my kids, and kind of, living my marriage that it was really hard to create any type of balance. What happens though is if a worst case scenario happens, like a divorce, you don't have anything to kind of lean on other than your family. And so, that was one thing that I think going forward, I'm a lot more intentional about carving off time, keeping in touch with friends on a platonic level, obviously, and really making sure that that's important, and also creating that healthy balance in a new relationship to be able to communicate with your partner and say, this is important to me, having friendships. Now, you still have to set new boundaries when you're in a relationship. I'm not going to go out to the bars and stay out till 2 a.m, with my guy friends. That's not exactly what I mean, but there needs to be some amount of time that I can carve off where I can go independently or jointly invest in some of my friendships. And that's something that I've committed to doing. And I really encourage everyone that I speak to in my platforms to make sure that you're cultivating and maintaining good friendships.
One of the things that you're talking about is how you can maintain those friendships when you're in a relationship. But I'm curious to know a little bit more about the dating side itself. So I'm curious, what was it like getting back into dating after years of marriage? And then what advice might you have for someone who's in a similar situation based on what you learned from your own experience and from the people in your community?
Well, I can throw a couple of expletive words here. Let me just say
I think we all can.
Let me just say that it was a circus because, and now that I have a platform where I speak about dating, and I've looked back at my own experiences as well as the people that I engage with and what they're experiencing, I can size it up pretty well. The fact of the matter is if you've been in a relationship for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and that relationship ends and you jump back into dating, it's not like getting back up on a pair of skis that where you skied when you were in high school and you haven't skied in 30 years, or getting back on a bike. It is a learned skill set to learn how to date with intentionality, and also learn how to develop discernment in terms of figuring out who's real and who isn't. And what we encounter in dating today, particularly with online dating, but just in general, is there's this large pool of daters who are still very much emotionally unhealthy from their past trauma, their past breakup, their past divorce, their past loss of a spouse. And you go through these emotions being single where you get lonely, you're yearning for affection and connection, and people have a tendency to dive into dating when they haven't healed. And so you've got all of this toxicity that's in the dating pool of people that are just unhealthy, shouldn't be dating at all. And the healthy ones that are in there are encountering them, and so we're dealing with a lot of unhealthy people. And a lot of times we don't know that. We can't see those behaviors because we haven't learned how to discern people, how to vet, how to pick, how to qualify, whatever verb you use. And so it becomes a real challenge. And, I always tell people my point of advice is, before you dive into dating, number one is you got to heal. You got to completely heal from your past trauma. But number two is you really need to study. You really need to do a little bit of pre-work and invest the time in learning how dating's changed, what's out there, and how to navigate it.
So some of what you talked about just now and before was how we need to heal sometimes after we get out of these long relationships. And that's fairly common. It's not unusual to feel that you need to kind of fill the empty space with someone new as soon as you can after a long-term relationship ends. And so it's really easy to rush into something without giving ourselves the proper time and process to heal. And while there's no one-size-fits-all approach to this, I'm wondering what advice you might have when it comes to figuring out whether you're really ready to start dating again, whether you're ready to start dating again.
Well, you're right. And the fact of the matter is, in a matter of 5 minutes, I can be on a dating app and communicating with people. So the ease of jumping into dating, particularly if you're in that state, it makes it really easy. And that's why you have people that do it. I always tell people, I get the question a lot, when are you ready? When should I be ready? And I tell people, when you feel excited and optimistic about your future, you feel like a complete human being, and you recognize that a plus one in your life does not complete you. It's merely icing on the cake. And when you feel really confident in yourself and where you're heading, the direction that you're heading, then you're ready to date, because then you're not going to be so needy. You're not going to lean on people. You're not going to exhibit all these behaviors that aren't healthy when you dive into new encounters. Now, how do you get there? Oh man, we could talk for hours on ways that you can invest in yourself to heal. And there's lots of ways in terms of self-care that you can invest in yourselves. But, I'm a huge advocate of utilizing therapy. There's just so many good experts that are in this field to help people work through attachment styles, trauma, narcissism, abuse. I mean, you name it. Across the spectrum, there are people that can help you, and it's the best investment you can make in terms of really, facilitating that healing. And if you don't do it, if you don't do the self-care, you don't focus on or utilize maybe a therapist, all it's going to do is prolong it. It's going to prolong that, that wound is going to scab over, and it's going to be really slow to heal it. And a lot of times that scab will fall off because you're going to get triggered or you'll get emotional. And it just makes that process that much longer. So you've got to do the self-care. And obviously therapy is one avenue which could help accelerate the healing.
So building off of that, whether it's a marriage or a long-term relationship, when you share so much of your life with someone, it can reshape parts of who you are. So when a relationship ends, it's really easy to feel lost, that something was so foundational, that something that was so foundational in your life is no longer there. What advice do you have for someone who's trying to find themselves again after a relationship ends?
It's true. I mean, a lot of times, like for me, I was in a 22-year marriage plus 4 years of dating beforehand. And so I didn't know anything other than being in a relationship. And I think a lot of people will try to jump right into the next one because that's all they're accustomed to. And there has to be, I feel like there's got to be this season, particularly after your healing, where you go through this self-discovery. And if you miss that opportunity when you're single, you've healed, and there's like this little rare window of opportunity where you have full autonomy. You can do whatever you want. You can choose to do whatever activity you want to participate in. Everything, all the decisions that you make are yours. They're not jointly made with another partner. It's kind of a cool feeling. And frankly, a lot of people in the divorce community and our community that have healed, and they're enjoying this portion of their life so much, they're like, is it weird for me that I don't want to get in a relationship? And I'm like, no, embrace the season. And so I call it a self-discovery process. It's like dusting off all the old passions, all the old hobbies that you kind of shelved as a sacrifice to your relationship. The things that you wanted to do, whether it's travel or a particular hobby, maybe you wanted to jumpstart a new career or start a small business. There's this just unique opportunity where you can really kind of rediscover yourself. It's really exciting. And I call it creating the newer version, kind of the version 2.0 of yourself. And frankly, those type of people, when they start dating, are so much more attractive than the people that haven't done the rediscovery and they're just hopping from one relationship to the next because that's all they know.
So I'm actually curious, talking about self-discovery and our sense of self, what are some steps you can take to maintain your sense of self? Wow, I'm really struggling with words today. Ways that you can maintain your sense of self when you're in a relationship.
Well, that's a great question. It's all about two things: boundaries and communication. And, there could be a lot of things, the fact that you want to maintain friendships, the fact that you have certain activities that you like to do that maybe your partner doesn't like to do. like travel. Maybe you like to travel. I traveled solo in the last year, and I was in a relationship, and I had a lot of people ask me, well, something must be wrong with them. Why is he traveling by himself? And I wrote a blog post on, hey, it's okay to travel solo when you're in a relationship. So, it's, you don't want to, in terms of the healthy activities that you're doing as a human being, as a single person, you don't want to give those up just because you're in a relationship if they're healthy. And so I think a lot of it is setting expectations as you dive real early in that relationship, when you decide, okay, we're committed to each other, we're exclusive, whatever you might call it, to sit down and talk about some of these things. These are the things that I want to continue doing in my life. Some of them I may want you to join me with. Some of them I like doing myself. I think another important piece is the amount of time that you spend just by yourself. You don't always have to be joined to the hip with your partner. And I think a lot of people in the divorce arena, when they come out of a relationship, they really appreciate that. And they want to set a boundary to where, hey, there's times I just like being by myself. We don't have to watch Netflix and chill every night. There might be times that I'm going to just watch TV or go to a coffee shop or do whatever by myself. And I think the more you're able to communicate that, and certainly listen, because the intent isn't negative. It's not like I want to get away from you, I'm trying to pull away. It's really like, these are things that keep me happy, keep me healthy, and I want to maintain them. And you need to respect your partner's boundaries as well. If they have things that they'd like to do or not like to do, then obviously it's a two-way street. So it's all about just communicating your boundaries, your desires, your hopes, your dreams right out of the gate. Don't wait for that to happen, for a problem to happen. Set it up front.
And just to kind of add something explicit to something I think you're saying implicitly, don't let other people's expectations or understanding of your relationship define how you want to navigate it. Hearing you talk about travel, I have the same thing. My parents are always like, wait, you're going without your partner to XYZ place. What about him? What is he going to do? I'm like, I don't know. He's going to stay at home and do his own thing, and it's going to be fine. We're adults. And so I think it's really easy to get caught up in what you think other people, understand a relationship to mean and what that means for how you need to be in your relationship. And so I think it's really valuable to kind of do what works for you and your partner.
100% agree. We already have a hard enough time as singles, where we're getting this cultural pressure, particularly in the United States, as well as friends and family, in terms of why aren't you dating? Why aren't you with someone? And so we're already dealing with that, and then we create this own internalized pressure that something must be wrong with us because we're hearing it from everybody else. But even when you're in a relationship, we don't need outside influences to tell us, what we know is healthy to be unhealthy or wrong. Now, I'm all about a friend coming to me and saying, I think this behavior that your partner's exhibiting or you may be unhealthy. But if we know it's to be healthy, it's healthy, and we're communicating, and there's, then stay out of my business. I'm just going to do the things, we're going to do the things that we want to do. So I do think that that's important, not to listen to all the outside influence.
I think this is a really great tee up to the next question, which is, how do you think dating changes as we get older?
Great question. I think there's a number of things. I think that we like our own time. So there's definitely more of a propensity for people to say, I like my own space. I think also there tends to be a lot more intentionality with people as they age, because they're like, okay, I'm tired of the riffraff that's out there. I'm not casually dating anymore, or I'm tired of dealing with these type of daters. And so although I would argue, I've read a lot of articles that suggest that the younger generations are now being more intentional about trying to get to the bottom of whether or not there's a fit with people. So there tends to be maybe a little bit more or less tolerance in just openly dating a lot of people, and more about intentionality, asking questions right out of the gate to try to figure out if there's alignment and there's a fit, which I think is good. I think there's always a season coming out of a relationship to explore in your dating, which means casual dating, because you kind of want to reconfigure what you want, what you don't want. Once you've kind of figured that out, then you're like, okay, enough of this. let's get serious. Let's be intentional. Let's have adult-like conversations, early, so that I can figure out if I'm wasting my time or not. So I think people are more protective of their time. That's kind of a good way of summing it up. And I do think people like their own time too. They like that balance.
That is actually a great segue to our next question too. One of the things that Jason and Jennifer talk about is time. And, we get busier as we get older and our lives are fuller. And on the date, they talk about time as it applies to vacations. But time is important, in general, like you were talking about when it comes to dating. So what advice do you have about setting time aside for others while also protecting your own?
Well, again, I think when you're entering into a relationship, or even if you start dating someone, because, I'd argue dating is not a relationship until it's defined. But let's say you've started dating someone regularly. It is important to set boundaries in terms of your own personal space. The amount of time that you like, how often are you going to go out on dates? How often are you going to see each other? How often do you communicate? These things are important, because if you don't talk about them, then one side or the other's expectations are not going to get met, and it's going to create problems. So it really is important to talk about communication styles and the frequency in which you go out on dates or see each other. And that carries into a relationship too, in terms of those type of boundaries. We talked about that a little bit about that earlier, about just sitting down and saying, I like my alone time, and I'd like to have it, and this is what it means to me, and vice versa. And just as an example, I've been dating for 19 months now, and we're about to move in. So one of the conversations that we had before we moved in, we sat down over dinner and said, okay, let's talk about expectations. And it wasn't this like serious. I mean, it was a little bit more casual, but we talked about, what if if I get up in the morning and I'm like, hey, I'm going to the coffee shop. I just want to get away. Or I want to do this or that, by myself. I want to make sure that you're not reading into it, because we're communicating what we'd like to do from a healthy standpoint. And it was such a good conversation to talk about that, so that, nothing's left to be assumed. I always say in my line of business, if you can eliminate the surprises in life or in a relationship, then it's going to be pretty smooth sailing. And the best way to eliminate surprises is to communicate. If you can communicate your desires, your goals, and you can listen as well, it's going to be a lot smoother versus just assuming or overthinking because you're not communicating.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. So when it comes to a voice-only date, how you engage in conversation is pretty crucial when it comes to making a lasting and positive impression. Do you think Jason and Jennifer were able to strike a balance between sharing and listening? And what advice do you have for our audience when it comes to finding balance between talking and listening on a date?
I thought that was an interesting banter back and forth. I thought that what I did think that was very positive was they definitely asked good questions and they listened. As a matter of fact, when I listened over it, I don't think that they interrupted each other once, which that's rare in a conversation, particularly when it's like early, because you're nervous. And so you want to, lead another story with your story. And they did a really good job listening. And I think that was kudos to both of them. I do think that, and they both asked really good questions. They're talking about traveling. They talked about work, work-life balance. there were some pretty good questions. They talked a little bit about their careers. I could tell that it was a little bit awkward at first, which I think any first date's like that, whether it's in person or on the phone. But both of them really started to warm up to each other, I think, as the conversation ensued.
So that leads to the $1 million question. Daniel, do you think they matched?
Do you want the honest truth?
Yeah,
of course.
I don't. I felt, and again, I don't know both of them. I felt like Jason was nervous. His voice was a little shaky, and he was a little bit too serious. There wasn't, and then I sensed just by the inflection of her tone, that she didn't seem interested. It seemed a little flatlined. And I think a lot of maybe the reason why both of them were like that is because even though they were asking good questions, it wasn't light and fun. There wasn't a whole lot of banter, if you know what I mean, or flirting, or, there was a little bit of laughter, but it just was, and I don't know if this was the first call or second, but it just seemed a little bit too serious right out of the gate.
I didn't think that they would match either. I thought it was a very cordial conversation, but I didn't feel the chemistry. And
Me
Laura, as the host, Laura, do you want to tell us what happened?
You are both correct. It was not a match in the end. Both did say that they enjoyed the experience, though.
Yay.
So
for that, at least.
But it's a great, I love it because it's just so much, you can read so much into it, right? Like if that conversation ensued over text, I probably couldn't read what I just described, or any of us, right? You can't tell inflection. You can't tell when somebody's really laughing or not. And I think that's what I love about your app is that, if you're really listening, you can tell if someone's really curious, if they're really engaged, if they're flirty. I mean, you can hear all those things in people's voices, and it just didn't sound like it was there.
I really appreciate the juxtaposition of what we were able to hear in the date versus imagining the transcription version. Because I feel if someone were to just read through the transcription, you miss a lot of the tone and the context, and it might sound like a really positive, not that it wasn't positive, but it might sound like, oh yeah, they were definitely going to match. But when you hear the way that they're talking to each other, yeah, it's a very cordial conversation, not filled with chemistry. So
that's why people like audiobooks, right?
Yeah, I love audiobooks.
They want to hear the emphasis. And Clubhouse is another app, which I know you guys are familiar with, was fairly revolutionary in social media to create an audible experience where you can hear other people articulate what they're thinking, what their opinions are, their views, and you can size people up based on how they speak. And no different from how your app's designed, where you can size up intelligence. You can size up whether or not they even want to be on the call, on the chat or the date, whether they're curious, whether they're interested in you, or are they doing all the talking. And so it's a genius idea.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. As we wrap up, a question we love to ask all our experts. Do you have any quick words of wisdom for our advice? Or, wow, I butchered that question.
We're both messing up.
Yeah. As we wrap up, a question we love to ask all of our experts. Do you have any quick words of wisdom or advice for our audience?
Well, I would say yes. First of all, dating is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So you just need to take your time, do the pre-work, and, the more that you're able to learn the art of dating and really prepare yourself, the better experiences that you're going to have. And realize that you're playing the long game here. If you sprint out of the gate in a marathon, you're not going to last past mile 1 or 2. So it's about slow and steady, let relationships cultivate naturally over time, not in one 10-hour conversation. It's like a crock pot. Let things cook and stew over time, and you'll have a lot better experiences. And always have a good attitude. If you don't have a good attitude, you probably shouldn't be dating. So keep maintaining that positive attitude, and you'll have great experiences.
Love that. Love that for the audience. Thank you so much for that advice and for joining us today. As our final question, how can our audience get connected with you?
2 places is where I play a lot in. First is on Instagram, and you'll probably put my username in there, but it's just at Daniel.Herrold, my full name. And then I have the exact same username on TikTok. And so TikTok I use as a platform to kind of laugh about dating and relationships. So it's a lot of kind of funny stuff that everybody can empathize with. And then Instagram is a little bit more serious content where I provide, useful tips and advice on how to navigate dating, whether it's after a divorce or just dating in general.
Thank you so much. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, guys.
If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain a bit. It's totally free, and Anchor will distribute the podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and lots of other podcasting platforms. Not only that, but it has creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. It also lets you make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make your podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
That's all we've got for you today. Shoot us a message on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at The Blink Date or at Date in a Blink to let us know what you think. If you want to try voice first speed dating from the comfort of your home, download the Blink Date app today. You can also sign up to participate in Date in a Blink by visiting our website at www.theblinkdate.com. In the meantime, thanks for joining us for this episode. We hope you enjoyed listening and look forward to talking with you again next time.